So this next video then will help you with Unit 3, that's equality and inclusion in care settings. 1.1 is asking you to explain what is meant by the terms equality, diversity, inclusion and discrimination. So to meet this assessment criteria, you've got to give a definition of what each of those terms mean and then explain what it means to you and how you comply with them in your work practice. So equality is about recognising and treating people equally, complying with human rights. Diversity is about recognising and valuing differences amongst people. Inclusion is about ensuring everyone is included in the care that you give and making sure that no one's left out. And discrimination is about not treating people less favourably based on those protected characteristics. So we're going to look at characteristics or protected characteristics within 2.1. But for this assessment criteria, all you simply have to do is give a definition of equality, diversity, inclusion and discrimination and explain what it means to you, how you comply with each of those terms. 1.2 asks you to give examples or describe ways in which discrimination can occur deliberately and inadvertently in the work setting. So all you have to do is give examples of when this can occur both deliberately and inadvertently. So for example, deliberate discrimination then is when you directly discriminate against someone based on a protected characteristic. That could be whereby you don't give someone a job when recruiting because of their sexual orientation, or you harass someone in the workplace or bully someone in the workplace because of their religion or their race or marital status. So it's where you're directly attacking an individual's protected characteristic and deliberately discriminating against that. Inadvertent discrimination then is when it's something that you didn't perhaps mean to discriminate against a person's characteristics. So for example, a residential setting that doesn't have wheelchair access inadvertently discriminates against a person who has a disability or may use a wheelchair. Now it's not intentional, but it inadvertently discriminates against their needs. 1.3 asks you to explain how practices that sort of like promote equality and inclusion reduce the likelihood of discrimination taking place. So what that means is if you work for an organisation that promotes equality, that recognises differences amongst people, that treats people equally with respect, that values differences, that allows freedom, that allows people to be who they want to be. If you create that culture, in turn what you're then going to do is reduce the likelihood of discrimination taking place, because you are going to identify stereotypes amongst staff and stop that from happening. You're going to prevent harassment, you're going to prevent bullying in the workplace, because you're recognising and creating that culture that we are different and that we should all be treated equal in relation to our human rights. It's going to show that you're complying with your policies and procedures. And what that then does is give that people that sense of well-being and that belonging, and that they feel valued at work. So what you've got to do is look at, if you create a culture whereby it's respectful of people's differences, treating people equally, that in turn then reduces the likelihood of discrimination taking place. 2.1 asks you to identify the legislation or codes of practice that relates to diversity, equality and discrimination. So for this assessment criteria, you're looking at laws, you're looking at what the regulations state, what legislation states in terms of equality, diversity and discrimination. So you're going to have to do some independent research, look at those legislations. Now in 2010, the Equality Act 2010 came out, and that looks at protected characteristics and making it unlawful to discriminate on the grounds of 9 protected characteristics. These characteristics are a person's age, disability, gender reassignment, marriage or civil partnership, pregnancy and maternity, religion or belief, sex or gender, and sexual orientation. So if you discriminate, whether that be deliberate or inadvertently, on the grounds of any of those protected characteristics, it's therefore unlawful. So what I want you to do within your answer is write about the Equality Act, write about those protected characteristics, and show how you follow them, and show how you don't discriminate against them within your work practice. There's also the Human Rights Act. So the Human Rights Act has 13 different articles within it. So Article 2 is that right to life. So again, do some research, look at those articles, look at the Human Rights Act and explain how you comply with that within your work practice. There's also a code of professional practice. So Skills for Care have laid out a code of conduct that any social care workers such as yourselves, care assistants, senior carers, home care managers has to comply with. And within that there's certain expectations and certain codes that you must follow. So to meet 2.1 you're going to have to do some independent study, look for some research, look for some legislations and write about each one. But don't just copy and paste that directly from the internet. Put it into your own words, show that you understand it and explain how you comply with the legislative requirements of each legislation that you actually identify as part of that research. 2.3 asks you to describe how to challenge discrimination in a way that promotes change. So what I would expect within your answer is that you're going to look at what you do in your work practice should you identify discriminatory behaviour and how you'd identify that. So if you overheard a staff member talking or were being discriminatory or homophobic or stereotyping individuals, I would expect you to stop, reflect on that situation and perhaps challenge it. Challenge that member of staff and let them know that what they're saying, what they're doing is wrong and the reasons why. It may be a new member of staff that's innocently saying something, however it can be viewed as a discrimination and it may harm or hurt someone. So we've got to have that zero tolerance towards any form of harassment, bullying or discriminatory practice in that workplace. So if we identify it and challenge it, we're creating a culture where it's not accepted. If we inform staff where the complaints procedure is, how to make a complaint, if and when they are subject to that discrimination, they're likely then to pass it on through the correct channels and then the manager can respond to that, investigate that complaint and speak to that staff member and let them know that what they're doing is wrong. By displaying posters in and around the care setting about equality, about diversity, about inclusion, it creates a culture where it's accepted and therefore discrimination is likely to occur. So what you've got to do within this answer is look at how you'd identify discrimination and what you do to challenge it to make sure that it has a positive impact on that work practice and make sure that all the workforce effectively know how to avoid discrimination and what they're going to do in the event that it happens. 3.1 asks you to identify a range of sources of information and support that can give advice, that can give information about equality, diversity, inclusion and discrimination. Now when people tend to answer this question, they tend to refer purely to people like the manager, like the colleagues. And whilst that's right, there's also other places you can go to for advice and information. Yes, the internet's useful. Yes, books from the library may be useful, but we need to look at specific organisations that may help with regards to equality, diversity, inclusion and discrimination. So for example, ACAS, they might be able to give you specific advice on employment laws, looking at your rights as an employee. On Facebook, there's a page called Equality Now. They're a human rights page that give you lots of information, lots of advice on human rights and equality laws. Yeah, you can read journals, look at what's current within that sector, look at what's happening within that sector and try and find specific information relating to your rights. You'll have an internal equal opportunities policy, a discrimination, a victimisation and harassment policy. within your work setting that you can also read. So it's not just about going to people, it's about what you can read and where you can go to for specific advice and information on equality. You may look at the Health and Safety website, the HSE. You may look at the Care Quality Commission's website, so CQC. So think about the specific places you can go to that may help with equality, discrimination, inclusion and diversity, and what sort of advice they're going to give you. So 3.1 and 3.2 ask you to explain how and when to access information and advice on equality, diversity, inclusion and discrimination. So within 3.1 you'll have looked at the sources of information, so where you can go to. But within 3.2 and 3.3 you've got to look at how and when you're going to go to those sources. So if you knew that someone at work was being discriminatory, was being stereotypical, was bullying someone, was harassing someone, that's when you'd go to these sources of support. That's when you'd seek additional advice. That's when you'd look to speak to your manager or consult your policy. So it's when you know there's a direct breach of equality laws, that people aren't treating people with respect and recognising diversity. When you've got particular concerns, that's when you'd look to consult your manager or consult your policy and procedures. If you get an uncertainty or a doubt that someone's saying or doing something that may be discriminatory but you're unsure, I would still challenge that and still report that and allow someone the opportunity to explain themselves. It may be innocent, but we've got to err on edge of caution and follow equality laws, protect those characteristics and make sure that people are free from victimisation, harassment and bullying within that work setting. So how? By consulting your manager, by consulting those policies and procedures, and when you feel that there's been discrimination taking place or is about to occur, that there's been some kind of harassment in the workplace, if you know there's been a direct breach of that policy, that's when you'd sort of like make that concern, raise that complaint.